The United States, meanwhile, was trying to maintain neutrality. They continued their dealings with various nations involved, particularly with the nations that they had good relationships with that were part of the Allies. However, the German Navy, which had become very modernized, very powerful, was really striking hard at shipping around the countries that made up the Allies. The Germans had developed and perfected what they called the Unterseeboot, or the U-boat, the submarine. They didn't invent it, but they had really perfected it and were using it quite a bit, doing a lot of damage to international shipping. May not be able to see this real well, but you can see it on the slides when I post them on iLearn. The dark areas here around the British Isles, for example, were areas that the German Navy declared off limits for other countries. Their reasoning was any ships entering this area might be bringing supplies to Great Britain. In 1915, a British luxury liner, the RMS Lusitania, was sunk by the German Navy in this dark blue area. Again, it was a luxury liner, not a military ship. 1,900 passengers, 1,200 of them died, including 128 American citizens who had booked passage on this ship. As you can imagine, that did not go over well with the American public. And here is a cartoon showing Uncle Sam, there's good old Uncle Sam there, delivering a message to Kaiser Wilhelm, the leader of Germany. He's delivering a letter to him. It's a bill, actually. He has knocked on the door didn't get answered, so Uncle Sam knocked the door open, delivers this bill for damages, and in the background you can see various things, including the Lusitania, that ships that the Germans had sunk, which had American citizens on them. So here, the U.S. government, as depicted in this cartoon, did quite a bit of saber rattling, made quite a few demands for restitution, but didn't go all the way to the point of declaring war against Germany. So that in reality, the U.S. government was able to look like they were doing something without committing to war. And again, even with these U.S. citizens being killed, a lot of people in the country just weren't invested in getting involved in this big, messy European war that already had produced so many casualties. In fact, when Wilson ran for re-election in 1916, his campaign slogan was, "He kept us out of the war." Here you can see some of the campaign buttons. Wilson, preparedness, prosperity, and peace with honor. So they had peace, hadn't gotten involved in the war, but with honor because they had not backed down exactly either. This button, war in Europe, peace in America. God bless Wilson. So the fact that the U.S. had not been drawn into this global conflict was points in Wilson's favor. Some people say that the fact that several Western states had changed their laws by this time to allow women to vote. It wasn't true nationally yet, but it was true in a lot of the Western states. May have tilted the election ultimately in Wilson's favor because a lot of women were now voting for the first time, and a lot of them didn't want their husbands and sons involved in this very costly, deadly war. That was 1916. 1917, Woodrow Wilson is inaugurated for his second term. And during that year, at the beginning of the year, something happened that caused a major change. And that was the Zimmermann telegram. The Zimmermann telegram, as it turns out, is a telegram sent by Zimmermann, who was a German diplomat. He sent a secret telegram to the government of Mexico. Now, if you'll recall, it's only been 3 years at this point, 1917, since that fiasco in Veracruz when the U.S. landed Marines in that Mexican city that led to a conflict and a lot of ill feeling. Well, the German government sends this telegram and essentially say, if you will come into the conflict on our side, on the Central Powers side, we will help you to regain your lost territory. All this area up in here that had once been part of Mexico, but had been taken from Mexico by the United States in the Mexican-American War in 1848. As often happens, the secret message wasn't so secret. It was intercepted. Not only did the U.S. military become aware of it, but it was leaked to the American press, and the American people found out about this offer by Germany to, in essence, take away 1/3 of the area of the United States and give it back to Mexico. This caused a lot of people who had been on the fence to very quickly get off the fence, and was enough to give Wilson finally justification enough to get into the war and to get into the conflict, have Congress declare war on Germany. And very quickly, the U.S. military was mobilized, a draft was instituted, huge numbers of soldiers were quickly trained and sent over there, which was the title of a popular song at the time. Here is something that will be difficult for you to read in this context, maybe, but it will be available on iLearn. I think you can see it well now. These are the 14 points, January 1918. These are 14 things that President Wilson gave as goals for U.S. involvement in this war, both to justify the war and to get more people in the United States on board with fighting it. So we'll go over these points. Number one, there should be no secret alliances between countries. Gee, I wonder where that came from. Number two, freedom of the seas in peace and war. Again, wonder where that came from. Both of those things obviously aimed at the things that Germany had recently done. Number three, the reduction of trade barriers among nations. Number four, the general reduction of armaments. Wilson believed that the fact that all the countries involved had rapidly escalated their defense budgets and their standing militaries had led to the possibility of them using those things more easily and had resulted in part in this war. Number five, here's where it starts getting really interesting. Wilson called for the adjustment of colonial claims in the interest of the inhabitants as well as of the colonial powers. So, adjustment of colonial claims, taking into account the best interests of the people who lived in the colonies as well as the countries that controlled them. That's the sort of thing that the Serbs and other groups had been looking for in the months and years leading up to this war. Number six, also very interesting. A little background, by 1918, the Russian Revolution had occurred. Russia had entered the Great War on the side of the Allies, and then that revolution you probably are familiar with that led to the downfall of the Tsar and the rise of Lenin and the Communist Party and the formation of the USSR, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. All that had happened by this time. The Allied powers had responded to that with quite a bit of suspicion of the new communist regime in Russia, in fact, to the extent of sending troops into the area. So point number 6 of the 14 points, Wilson calls for the evacuation of Russian territory and a welcome for its government to the Society of Nations. So he says, take the Allied troops out of the Soviet Union and welcome the Soviet Union, the now established government, which the other countries refuse to acknowledge. Number 7, the restoration of Belgian territories in Germany. So the areas Germany has seized, make them give them back. Number 8, the evacuation of all French territory by the Germans, including Alsace-Lorraine. which was a problematic area. It was a region of France where a lot of Germans lived, and both sides laid claim to it. Number 9, the readjustment of Italian boundaries along clearly recognizable lines of nationality. Italy was pretty much a mess at this time. Number 10, another very interesting one, independence for various national groups in Austria-Hungary. Independence. Number 11, the restoration of the Balkan nations and free access to the sea for Serbia. So these countries, like Serbia, that Austria-Hungary had declared war on, and groups within Austro-Hungary, like the Serbs, the Bosnians, and etc., should have independence and be guaranteed access to the sea so they wouldn't be isolated. Number 12, protection for minorities in Turkey. That is aimed primarily at the Armenians, who were a target of genocide in the Ottoman Empire at this time, and the free passage of the ships of all nations through the Dardanelles. Number 13, independence for Poland, including access to the sea. Poland had had a very unfortunate history because they had the misfortune of being right between Germany and Russia, and being relatively flat so far as the terrain goes, which meant that the Germans and Russians for centuries had been marching back and forth across Poland, trading really practically ownership of it back and forth to the detriment of the Polish people, who had not been able to maintain their independence for long periods of time. So he's calling for independence for them. And finally, 14, Wilson called for a League of Nations to protect mutual guarantees of political independence and territorial integrity to great and small nations alike. A League of Nations in which the little countries get a say. The little countries have their territorial integrity as well as the big ones. His belief being that if there were this big organization to which nations could take their conflicts with one another, they could then be worked out without going to war, to the benefit of everybody, which is part of the reason that this conflict, the Great War or World War I, came to be known by some people as the war to end all wars. Remembering what we've said about Wilson and his very evangelistic approach to politics, particularly the spread of democracy. This is what he believed would safeguard those things. Now, take a moment and think about it. He's calling for the independence of all these colonies and for their territories to be adjusted to their benefit. How much support do you think Wilson had for these goals from his allies, Britain, France, and etc., who themselves had lots of colonies? Well, fact is, everyone was not on board with this idea the way that he was, as we will see.